Here it is. Why is it not the sources of religious insight? They don't have a... Oh, I guess we got the whole book is the problem. It is fantastic, by the way. I highly recommend it if you like reading. But this was his reply to the varieties of the religious experience. So they're neighbors. Biographers, by the way, were quite upset that they were neighbors. Since they were neighbors, unlike a lot of other philosophers that would write lots of letters to the people they corresponded with, they walked to work with one another, kind of like Einstein and Gödel, right? And as a result, they didn't write to one another, and so no one can find out what the heck the two of them discussed. But William James' focus in his religious exploration for the Gifford Lectures, that's the focus is on religion, and for William James, it's a psychological issue. The importance of religion is not because, well, some religion is true and other religions are false. He's not interested in that at all. He studies a whole bunch of worldwide religions, and what he concludes is that it's the psychology of religion that's important to us. And the main concern is that we accept that there's something that's greater than ourselves. There's something that exists that's greater than ourselves. And the impact that has on us psychologically. But with Royce, instead, the focus is not so much on the psychology of religion, but that there is actually a type of religious experience that proves that God exists. And he was, as well as James, a very popular speaker in that time. By the way, remember, they didn't have radio, they didn't have TV, they had orchestras that would play every so often, but they had theaters where people would come and speak. So all over the United States, they would go and it would be advertised as, so-and-so William James would be speaking, and a crowd would come to listen. So that was like part of the kind of entertainment the educated people would have, to go and listen to a speaker. And James and Royce both spoke all over the place. I want to mention, though, Louis Agassiz. There's a building at Harvard that's named the Louis Agassiz, I think it's a natural history museum. He was originally from Switzerland, Swiss born. Why do they call him an American biologist? Well, primarily, I guess, because his career was in Harvard. But, I mean, he was from Switzerland. In any case, he's the biologist that teaches at Harvard that influences James and others. In fact, he would also take people, kind of their Harvard graduation gift, or trip rather, was to go with him to the Amazon to do explorations. And that's kind of an interesting Harvard thing. Not only would William James go with him, but that kind of trip continued. I remember, if you read the biography of Teddy Roosevelt, he went on such a trip when he graduated from Harvard to the Amazon, and it was while he was there that he also got ill. And by the way, James got ill. And so it seems like the typical thing for you to finish Harvard is to go on a trip to the Amazon where you will get deathly ill. I don't know. But Agassiz was quite famous, and everybody was interested in him, and he was totally against Darwin. So his arguments were that there was a creation and that there's a dog in the hallway looking at me as if it's my fault that he's a dog. But in any case, Agassiz wanted to go to the Amazon because he wanted to prove that if there was an ice age, that the Amazon was full of ice as well. And so he was looking to see signs of an ice age in the Amazon. And he thought he found it. And James thought, no, I don't think you have. Which I think, if we look at the way the different ice age covering of ice is depicted on the earth, no, they didn't have ice all over the Amazon. But he nonetheless was quite an influential individual, and arguing against Darwin's evolution. And what's interesting is from the notes that I get from Louis Menand, the Metaphysical Club, there is what he calls the unproblematic, because there's family resemblances among all of the different pragmatists, but there's an unproblematic, that is, in a traditional view, the things that all pragmatists have in common. And he describes them as, number one, the prestige of science and scientific method. I think we could compare that to other countries today and say that in the United States, we think of science as, well, that is the kind, even in Kansas, which you know is the black and white state. Okay, that joke just went flat. So if you're not familiar with The Wizard of Oz, it starts off in black and white, and she gets picked up by the whirlwind and taken to Oz, and everything suddenly is in color, and she famously comes out and says, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore, because now it's in color instead of Kansas. So that was a black and white joke. Sorry about that. But even in Kansas, they want their schools to teach science. And they have a problem with that because they want science taught because that's what we know for sure. And then scientists point out, but it's all hypotheses. We don't know it for sure. That's the main thing about science, is we don't say that we know anything for sure. That's the one thing we know for sure, is we don't know anything for sure. Not a paradox, by the way. That's a theory of types that explains that. And you have a statement on this level, and then you have a statement on this type that explains things about the statements on this type. This statement isn't included in the set of things that you're saying that about. So theory of types escapes the dilemma of that kind of a paradox. But science, we think very highly of science. I think that's pretty much all Americans think highly of science. That's unusual, again. Remember, our country is very different from a lot of other countries where science is like almost illegal, compared to kind of teachings that you're supposed to get in your madrasa, for example. Science is not included. There's what is it, Boko Haram or whatever? There's a phrase that means that Western education is forbidden. That's like a group, the ones that keep abducting schoolgirls from schools by like the hundreds and taking them because Boko Haram, I think?
It's along that, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there are other countries where they don't have that kind of respect for science that we do. I notice that that's part of pragmatism, is that we think of science as prestigious, and the scientific method itself, right? We also have a strength, or we think of empiricism as important. Granted, empiricism is problematic ever since David Hume. Remember, we're rescued a little bit by Immanuel Kant, and Hegel kind of trumps that even more so by saying we've got this dialectical process, and but we end up then with the idea that reality is socially constructed, because what we mean by reality is a conceptual schema of things that's dependent not only on the logic associated with that language, but also with the narrative associated with that model. Remember we talked about, what kind of model do you like, which scientists especially do you think of? My favorite model is a model of models, and that's Stephen Hawking's and Mladenov's view of model-dependent realism. Right? We think of reality based on the model that we're using in order to describe it. And we have multiple models, so we actually have multiple views of reality. Even when we're thinking about the conflicts between, Henry Bergson, who we haven't talked about, and Einstein on the nature of time. Remember, for Einstein, time changes its speed depending on the speed of light, right? The speed of light is constant, but if you're moving closer to the speed of light, time has to slow down because it's an equation, right? So as the one number goes up, the other one has to go down. So time has to literally change depending on how fast something is moving towards the speed of light, to the point where at the speed of light, time stops entirely. Bergson, on the other hand, thought of time as existing for all eternity, because he was also a creationist, that God created all of time, very much like St. Augustine thought of time. So you get this kind of conflict. And physicists argue over, well, which view is right? Or which view of particles is correct? Is it a wave or is it a particle? Oh, it's a wavicle. No, you can't have that, etc. Well, let's step back, physicists, and realize that thanks to Kant, we realize that what we're doing is structuring the way we perceive phenomena through the structure of our minds, which are set based on our language, which is set based on the models that we're using within that language. So guess what? It's not a conflict any more than a car in front of me on the highway is one thing and many things. It's not a conflict. It screwed the minds up of the Greeks trying to figure out how could it be one thing and many things. Well, for us, we don't have that problem because everything is one thing and everything is many things, because that's the way the human mind frames everything, right? So it's not a conflict. It's not like reality is something in two places at once. That's our different ways of perceiving it. So there's no conflict. But empiricism is nonetheless a social consensus on what we're experiencing. Is COVID this or COVID is that? Was it an actual disease that got out of a lab in Wuhan and is endangering everybody because of how easily spreadable it is? Or was it an invention paid for by Dr. Fauci to the Chinese in order to develop a war weapon made out of a biological weapon? I have different arguments over that, and the one argues that the vaccinations are actually worse for you than the virus, and so you shouldn't take the vaccinations because those will kill you more readily than the vaccine or the vaccinate the virus. I'm sorry, I'm getting them mixed up. You get the idea. We've got a division among some people in the country that don't believe the medical doctors. They instead believe the ideas that all of this was a conspiracy, and the best thing for you to do is avoid getting the vaccinations, and we shouldn't have governments paying all these billions of dollars to big pharma because they're actually in cahoots with all of this. They're making the whole reason for it is because they're making money. That's one view. Then you got the other view that this is the evolution of a new kind of virus, and what we need, thank goodness, is medicine rapidly able to diagnose those viruses and figure out and create a vaccination for us so that we can get a new vaccination every couple of months. Yay, us. empiricism. It's a problem for us. Warranted assertions are not easily agreed to by everybody. Biological evolution. Notice we still have a problem with this. If you look up a conflict between Stephen Jay Gould who has a fantastic little book, I think it's about 1,400 pages, called The Structure of Evolutionary Theory. And as you read that book, what you discover is that the theory of evolution is evolving. I love that. I think that's hilarious. The theory of evolution is evolving. So when people say, oh, I don't believe in evolution, you're like, well, which evolution don't you believe in? You know, which theory don't you believe in? There's so many different evolutionary theories. You know, it's almost like saying, you know, as like Richard Dawkins says, he's an atheist. He's an atheist. And people are like, wow, I'm not an atheist. I believe in God. And they'll say, well, do you believe in Zeus? Oh no, I don't believe in Zeus. Do you believe in, name another god? You know, the flying spaghetti monster? No, I don't believe in that. Well, so you are an atheist. You just, what kind of atheist are you? A Catholic atheist or a Protestant atheist? You know. That's an Irish joke. You go to Ireland, and you're trying to get in, and a gang confronts you, and says, "Are you an atheist? Are you a Catholic or a Protestant?" And you answer, "I'm an atheist." I'll pause them for a minute, but then they'll look at you and they're, "Are you a Catholic atheist or a Protestant atheist?" My jokes are just terrible today. Well, Stephen Jay Gould. But he argues with people like Daniel Dennett. I think I've had a couple folks in here who've been working on Daniel Dennett. In fact, a terrific term paper just came in on Daniel Dennett. And they have a big argument between the two of them, or they did while Gould was still alive. And the argument was over, I don't remember right now, but nonetheless, they had a big argument over